Welcome to
Radio Lab.
This podcast may contain foul language.
But don't worry, guys, we out for you. The show is
Presented by
Scarsdale High School. Hey, if you guys need a place that has Brob, Ding, Nagy, and taxes, then Scarsdale's your place. Jeff, what's up with the face?
Well, two things. First of all, you are not funny. Let me handle the comedy. And second, what kind of words are you using?
Brob, Ding, Nagy, and that's my normal vocabulary.
Dude, I just saw you go on thesaurus.com and look for the biggest word possible.
Well, you have to sound intellectually sexy any way possible.
Bull.
Jeff, at least I don't sound like a goat when I talk.
Radio Lab.
Enough of this. We got a show to do.
Alright, so what are we going to be talking about today?
So I was watching the news recently, and I saw this man in Louisiana have a marching band at his funeral.
You're kidding.
Nah. And not only did he have a band, but people were dancing and singing at this guy's funeral as well. Now you see how you said,
You're kidding.
that is the idea we're going to grapple with today. We're going to figure out the appropriate way to react to loss.
But Jeff, when you're talking about loss, I associate that term with sadness. So when you're speaking about the appropriate way to react to loss, I would suspect that to be to grieve or to regret. And maybe that's not the appropriate way, but that's definitely the universal way from what I have seen.
Well, you obviously haven't seen too much because I have a story from Mr. Conrad, who is a chemistry professor from Scarsdale High School, where loss ironically brought joy to someone.
All right, so the scenario I'm thinking of actually is someone that I shared an apartment with when I was in graduate school, and she was a few years older than me. And after I left, this was in New York City at Columbia, and after I left, she was still there, and she got married, and I was overseas, and she's tree. And I saw this article in the newspaper about a woman who was carrying twins, and one of the twins was found to have Down syndrome, but not the other one. And the woman decided that she was going to try to terminate the pregnancy of the twin that had Down syndrome without damaging the other twin, which was a very experimental procedure and sort of risky. And somewhere along the way in the article, I realized that the woman they were talking about was the person that was my friend.
Mr. Conrad described the feeling like being hit by a train. Not only was his friend going to undertake such an experimental procedure, but also 2 newborns' lives were at stake.
And I called her up and I said, "Oh my God, Kathy, this has got to be you." And she said, "It is me." And it was an agonizing decision because I knew there was a risk that in terminating the one twin, I would lose the other one who was a healthy, genetically healthy. But I just couldn't see dealing with having twins and having one of them have Down syndrome. And it was just very interesting to talk to her about that as a loss, because on the one hand, she gained something, which was a very healthy baby, who she named Thomas, which I thought was really interesting because that means the twin. And he had been a twin, but he was born not a twin because the other one had been aborted. And she just the trying to think of being in that situation and thinking you wouldn't be able to deal with as a parent having these 2 children. With one very, having a significant disability, and the other not, and the risks involved with twins in the first place, and then going through this sort of experimental procedure almost to abort the first one and not the other.
You know what? I think she's right. Yeah, she is right. She obviously has common sense because kids with mental disabilities tend to have harder lives than those who don't. And because of that, she actually found joy in the loss of her child.
Oh my God. Jeff, do you not have a heart? A kid should be able to live no matter the disabilities. How could any mother find joy in the loss of their child? I'm pretty damn sure that any mother on this earth would be willing to sacrifice their time to raise a child, no matter how hard that child's life could be.
What kind of mother would want to see their child with mental disabilities suffer through school and life?
Jeff, it's not about the child suffering. Today, there are many options to make life easier on that child. They have special schools for kids with disabilities. They have slower classes. And not only that, they put these kids with other kids just like them, so the kid won't feel alone in this world. And what are you talking about? The kid could have so much potential in one area and maybe change the world for the better. There's no way we can know the possibilities that are in store for that one child.
All right, slow down. Let's just go to the next interview. All right, guys, before we let you hear the interview, imagine that you were in a foreign country and you just got mugged in your sleep. What would you do?
Well, Jeff, personally, I would just call the cops like a normal human being.
But the man we're going to be talking about today didn't really think about his situation thoroughly enough. Mr. Thadani described this man as a
determined individual.
So determined that he chased this dude all over Copenhagen looking for his wallet.
He did a semester abroad in Germany and Copenhagen in Denmark. So this is a monetary loss. So apparently he's sleeping in this hostel, which is called like a gymnasium. So it's literally a gym with beds across the entire gym. So you've got like 300-400 people crammed into this gym because it's pretty cheap. So he goes there, he's staying there for a night, and essentially what happens is he wakes up in the middle of the night because someone is pushing him and tugging him. And he wakes up and this guy's like right over him and he's like trying to reach into his pockets or something. And he freaks out. So he pushes the guy away. He goes back to sleep. It happens again. The guy gets a hold of his wallet. This is like 3 o'clock in the morning. So my friend starts running down the streets of Copenhagen, chasing this guy, looking for his wallet, while he was somewhat molested.
Wait. Can you repeat that for me?
While he was somewhat molested.
Okay, yeah, that's what I thought he said.
This man must be the definition of unlucky.
Oh no, and it gets better too.
Eventually what happens is he's running through the streets of Copenhagen in his underwear, trying to get his wallet back from this guy who stole it. So he didn't find this guy. The guy ran off. But not only did he have his money stolen, but he was also stripped of his humility, or whatever you want to say, his decency.
That was stupid. Who would do that in a million years?
You know, that's just one way to look at it because he was basically just following his own instincts.
What, his instincts to get killed? Look at the consequences. He was freaking molested. How could you say that it was okay for him to follow his instincts?
Well, not everyone has the...
What, great decision making?
Wow, you're cool. Way to interrupt me. But anyways, what I was about to say is that not everyone reacts to loss the way you do. Everyone reacts to loss in their own ways.
Well, I have to agree with that. Another thing that we can all agree on is that the loss of a family member leaves a permanent emotional scar. The same emotional scar can be seen on a woman that Pete, who is a youth outreach worker from Scarsdale High School, tells us a story about.
Before I was working here, so the youth outreach workers are social workers. We're trained social workers. And so social workers work in a number of different capacities. And I was working within child welfare in Brooklyn. So I was encountering, most of the families that I was encountering, the child had been removed from the family by the state. So I was seeing loss continuously. And in a lot of cases, there was, death had occurred in the family as well.
Just to add on to what Pete said, these children are found in abusive homes.
Continuously.
Homes where their parents are drug addicts.
Continuously.
Homes that are just not suitable for children.
Continuously.
The household that Pete is about to refer to went through very unfortunate circumstances.
There was a woman who pretty much her adult life was marked by tragic deaths around her. Her 4-year-old daughter was playing with her 9-year-old god sister. The mothers were best friends. They were inside. The kids were outside the playground outside the building. The two girls started squabbling over a rubber ball. The 9-year-old ran into the house, got a knife, came out, and killed the 4-year-old girl.
Even though this is like my 100th time listening to this story, I still think it's pretty messed up.
Can you imagine the pain the mother must have went through? It probably was unbearable.
Obviously, a 9-year-old is not going to be held legally or criminally accountable for that, but that woman lost her 4-year-old really over a rubber ball. And that led her, the following 8 years or so, she was pretty much just a very bad alcoholic. She was drunk all the time. That's how she reacted to that loss.
Even though it may seem wrong, alcohol is one of the many ways to deal with loss, and it is not uncommon.
Obviously, a 9-year-old is not going to be held legally or criminally accountable for that, but that woman lost her 4-year-old really over a rubber ball. And that led her, the following 8 years or so, she was pretty much just a very bad alcoholic. She was drunk all the time. That's how she reacted to that loss, is that she was not able to process it. And I think as social workers, what we try to do is, one, in a situation where you have a tragedy that's that extreme, no one's able to process something like that immediately. And you're just trying to put them in a safe space where they're not going to do something that's going to endanger themselves or other people. And over time, process it. You'll never get over a death of a family member, particularly a child. It's just not something that ever leaves you. But when you're using drugs or alcohol to try to just mask it, it doesn't get you anywhere.
Unfortunately, it is that reaction to loss that puts so many kids in horrible households. Imagine if that mother had another child. That child would have to face the consequences of the mother being an alcoholic. However, I still feel for the mother. That wound that she got from her daughter was reopened by the tragedy of her brother.
She had been sober for a year and a half or so, was beginning to make changes in a lot of areas of her life. I get a call from her early in the morning, and a block from her house in the middle of the day, her younger brother had just gotten shot in the head and murdered in the middle of the day. All the bricks that she had put back up, just got knocked down.
This woman was devastated because not only was the new pain of her brother's death fresh in her mind, but the old pain of her daughter's death was coming back.
I just hugged her for a while, and then over the next few months, we just began to talk about what her brother had meant to her, how in some ways he would be able to live on in her life.
As you can see, the mother was devastated by the loss of her daughter and her brother. But, this makes us wonder why some people in this world just do not show remorse at the loss of their loved ones.
And that idea of not showing remorse brings up a good point in a book that we are reading in English class called The Stranger by Albert Camus. Basically, the protagonist in the book is someone by the name of Marceau, and to be blunt, he's a man of no emotion. In the beginning of the novel, Marceau's mother had just died, and Marceau was attending her funeral. And he felt no pain or regret, as most of you would expect when you're faced with the loss of someone as close as your mother. So that brings into mind the question, was that the appropriate way to react to loss? Was that the right way, or was it wrong? And we're going to answer that question through the next story, which is going to be a famous Greek story that's going to be told by Miss Schaefer, who is an English teacher here at Scarza High School.
I'm sure that you've heard before the most famous story of loss of all time, and that's the story of Orpheus. Maybe you know the story of Orpheus. Orpheus was a really talented musician, and he played something that's like a guitar called a lyre. And Orpheus had a woman that he loved more than anybody else in the world, and that woman's name was Eurydice. And one day Eurydice was walking through the forest, and some god saw her from afar and thought, God, she is so beautiful. And this god decided that he had to have her, and he started to pursue her through the forest, and Eurydice got scared, and she started to run away from him. And as she ran, she wasn't looking where she was going, and she stepped on something that she shouldn't have stepped on. She stepped on a snake that was hidden in the grass in the forest. The snake bit her, and she died. So Eurydice was dead, the love of Orpheus's life, and when he found this out, he couldn't cope with that loss, and his instinct was to channel that loss into his music. And so he started to play his instrument, and what came out of him was the saddest music that anybody had ever heard. His music was so excruciatingly sad that everybody who was around to hear the music stopped what they were doing and just was frozen there, and even the grass stopped growing and the trees stopped moving. So finally the god said to Orpheus, Orpheus, you've got to stop this. It's too depressing. None of us can stand it. You've got to get over this. And Orpheus says, there's only one thing that will make me feel better, and that's having Eurydice back again. And the god said, but she's dead. And Orpheus says, I have to have her. She's the only thing that gives my life meaning. So the god said, all right, we'll grant a special exception for you, Orpheus. You and only you can go down into the world of the dead and get her back again and bring her back to life as long as you stop playing that music. And we'll tell you how to get there. There's only one thing, though. You have to listen to Hades, and he'll tell you what the instructions are to get her out. So Orpheus went to the land of the dead. There was a 3-headed monster that guards the entrance so that no living person can pass. But he played his music for this 3-headed monster, Cerberus, and he got past the monster and into the land of the dead. And Hades saw him and said, Orpheus, what are you doing here? You're living. This is not a place for you. And Orpheus says, I've come for my wife. I've come for Eurydice. And Hades said, well, you can have her. There's only one thing, though. You must take her up that path to the land of the living. But as you do that, you cannot look at her. You have to keep your eyes on the light, Orpheus. You have to keep your eyes on the world of the living. Don't look back to the world of the dead. That's not for you. Keep your eyes on the light, and she will follow you. So Orpheus said, okay. And they led this woman to him, wrapped in her funeral shroud. He started to go up the path to the land of the living, just trusting that his beloved wife was behind him. And he tried to keep his eyes on the light. He tried to keep his eyes on the world of the living. But then he thought he heard some noise, and he couldn't help it. He got worried, and he looked back to see her body. And their eyes met. She looked at him, and he looked at her. And then she disappeared back down to the land of the dead. He lost her again, a second time. Only this time it was his fault. It was his fault that he lost her, because he couldn't keep the promise. So he came back out into the land of the living, more bereft than he had been before he went to the world of the dead. So I think the story of Orpheus is the prime story of loss, because it shows what happens. You can't let go. You become obsessed with the world of the dead. You keep your eyes down on the pit, on the darkness, not on the light. So if you want to know the appropriate way to cope with loss, I think the answer is you've got to let it go.
I love the story Ms. Schaefer chose to talk to us about loss, because personally I feel that Greek mythology holds a lot of key ideas and morals that hold true to the human race, even to this day.
Speaking of key ideas, the one important idea that can be taken out of this story is how people should react to loss, which is to let it go.
Now, before the story by Ms. Schaefer, we were talking about Rousseau and his reaction to loss. And we asked, was it the wrong way to react to loss? Because when his mother died, he showed no emotion. So what me and Jeff have found is that actually Rousseau may not have been wrong. We think he just skipped 4 out of the 5 stages of loss. The first 4 stages include denial, anger, bargaining, and depression. And then the 5th stage is acceptance, which can also be thought of as letting it go. So what Rousseau did that we think was that he skipped the first 4 stages of loss, which obviously will seem weird to most of us, and just straight up went into acceptance. So to answer my question, there is no right or wrong answer in how to react to loss. Everyone is different, thus making everyone's reactions to loss different. Rousseau just happened to let go his mother's death right away. That shouldn't be wrong. That shouldn't be right. That's just how he dealt with loss. So we can't really look at reactions to loss on society's terms, rather just the individual and how he feels.
All right, guys, that is our interpretation of the proper reaction to loss. Of course, some of you may disagree, and some of you may agree. This question is still open for opinion. And thanks for listening today, and we hope you all learned something new.